Let's stay with France, but let's switch from international football to Ligue 1. And I'm sure you are aware, JJ, that since last season there has been intrigue as to what will happen to PSG, or where PSG will be this season post their matinee idol going to Real Madrid. Have you been able to get a sense of how Luis Enrique is perhaps reshaping the team post that moment?
I mean, I find it really refreshing what PSG and Luis Enrique are doing at the moment, because many people expected PSG to rush out into the transfer market to sort of throw money at the biggest star name available. Because let's face it, it's not only PSG who are sort of under that pressure and that expectation, to fill the void left by Kylian Mbappé. There is a big need for Liga to have, a sort of marquee name, to attract people to the league now, especially given, the recent developments in terms of the TV rights situation. But Luis Enrique has had certain players in certain positions offered to him over the course of the summer, and has said, "No, I'm happy with the players that we've got in the squad." They've boosted the group available to him with one player per position. So you've got Safonov in goal. Bit debatable out of all the summer signings made, but other than that, William Pacho, who's fitted in brilliantly in defence, Joao Neves in midfield, who looks like a superb player, Desiree Doué sort of for the attack / midfield, sort of in between those two positions, who also has shown great promise, not only with Rennes, but sort of in his first couple of steps with PSG as well, and was obviously part of the Olympic run this summer. So it is really, as somebody who's covered PSG for a long, long time, I feel like things make more sense than they have done in a long while under Luis Enrique. Whether or not that can actually stay to be the case, we will have to wait and see. But for me, right now, it feels like there are players for each position. There's depth, with the exception of Gonzalo Ramos, who's out for a little while in attack, which I think could become a bit tricky once the Champions League gets underway, but we'll see how PSG handle that. But if you look at what the sudden clarity has given Luis Enrique in terms of being able to promote certain players, Bradley Barcola, for example, suddenly PSG have their new emerging star on the left. Barcola has started the season in stunning form, not just for PSG, but also for France, scoring the fastest goal in the national team's history against Italy, despite the fact that the game didn't go according to plan after that ball hit the back of the net 13 seconds in. And the only sort of blind spot I'd say in this team at the moment is maybe a little bit of depth in defence, but that's natural because Lucas Hernandez is out for the rest of the year at least, if not the beginning of next year as well. And right now it feels like Luis Enrique has the team where he wants them to be. You look at the football that they're playing, it seems to be a bit more consistent than last season because the ideas were clearly there and they had their moments. But right now it feels like PSG, the team is quite familiar with each other. There's competition for places, but there's no sort of obvious overbearing star. I'm actually pretty optimistic for PSG and where they are right now, and it's no surprise to me that PSG are thinking of extending Luis Enrique's contract as well.
Yeah, and it does feel, Andy, as if, apart from anything else, Luis Enrique has been given much more of a say in the club. He's gone from being perhaps a modern kind of coaching role to becoming an old school kind of managerial role, having a say in transfers, etc. Did he, looking at it from the outside, obviously, I imagine it will make a difference to the way that he's able to have, to shape this new PSG or post Mbappé PSG in his own image. Was he given that, or did he take it, that control, that power? Do you know?
I think it's a bit of both, really, because I think circumstances allowed him to take that opportunity. Clearly, he's always wanted to play the way that he wants to play. And I think you see even some of the minor signings like Arno Tenas, for example, to play in goal, a goalkeeper who can actually, is actually good on the ball, is really important to the way that he wants to play. But as JJ was saying, this forthcoming contract extension, that says everything you need to know about the amount of power that he has. And really, there must have been so many voices in the boardroom saying, regardless of what's good for on the pitch, we need someone to pick up the star slack of Mbappe, Neymar, and Messi. them having gone all in the space of a year, pretty much. So in terms of PSG being marketable, in terms of them being the football brand that they have been in the past 3 or 4 years, you I think can question what they've done recruitment wise. Football wise, I think JJ's absolutely right. You can't question it at all, and it's what the coach wants. Clearly, it's what he wants, is to build this team that's kind of quite egalitarian, much as his Barcelona 2015 Champions League winning team were in his own image. You think back to then, signing Ivan Rakitic in 2014, not the sexiest signing, but the signing that was the missing piece. And maybe João Neves, in being a very different player, is part of that as well. But I think someone who, like him, has very strong convictions football-wise, and also his ability to let the existing talent breathe. I think that's really important. So we were talking about Gonzalo Ramos being out for a bit. Is this the moment where Randal Kolo Muani grabs the opportunity with both hands? We look at Bradley Barcola, who actually, when he arrived from Lyon, was not only someone who was seen as a young player a little bit for the future, but also when he had that brilliant second half of the season in 22-23 with Lyon, it's funny because even in a Lyon context, that was a subordinate role, because he really caught the eye, not by scoring loads of goals himself, but setting up loads for Lacazette and underlining the fact that he could be a complementary piece to important players. So it's not only his talent, but his ability to not need to be the centre of everything, I think, that really appealed to PSG. And now we're seeing a moment, actually, where the opportunity is perhaps there for him to raise his status, to raise his profile with the talent and ability he's got, and score goals. And he's been terrific in the opening weeks of this season, both for club and country.
Yeah, there's one sort of elephant in the room as well that I might add, just to piggyback off of what Andy's been saying. Xavi Simons. So we're saying that PSG sort of haven't addressed sort of the superstar issue in the team, but equally, they do have sort of one of the next superstars of the world game under contract. Now, they've almost been challenged by Xavi Simons, who is going to spend a second consecutive season on loan with Leipzig, to prove that they are the club where he should sort of, commit his future to and be playing his football. Because Luis Enrique was clear last season before the Euros that Xavi Simons, if he came back, would have a place sort of in his plans, in his thinking for PSG. Whether or not that's still the case, we'll have to wait and see. A lot will depend on Simons' form in Germany the second time around, but also how, PSG managed to play if there's an obvious role for him. Because in terms of the potential star of the future, Simons is definitely sort of one of the hot names on that list at this moment in time, and the kind of name that PSG could build around in the future, but that Luis Enrique could also use on the pitch, except for the fact that when PSG tried to sort of resolve his situation this summer, aside from the fact that there's a tricky situation that involves PSV Eindhoven, which I believe only expires sort of basically in the winter transfer window, there's also the issue of Xavi Simons sort of having been burned a little bit by PSG in the past, but a lot of things at PSG having changed since. I know there was that moment as well in the Euros where people were lip reading Mbappé going over to Simons after France played the Netherlands and basically asking him why he didn't want to join PSG. And it does feel like this is a moment now for Luis Enrique with this team that makes more sense than any PSG side has done over the last couple of years, to really show that there is the potential for Simons to be able to express himself and also challenge for the kind of, individual and collective trophies that he wants to in the future, without having to move away from Parc des Princes. So that's another fascinating storyline that could develop this season, and partly away from the French capital as well.
Yeah, he must be looking at Pep Guardiola, though, Andy, and thinking, well, why can't it be like that for me? The power that Pep Guardiola's got at Manchester City, I'm in the right place at the right moment, and with the right qualities to be a French version of that. But is PSG set up in that way to allow a coach to be so dominant? I heard, for example, that Luis Enrique was instrumental in PSG not getting into the race for Victor Osimhen, who's ended up at Galatasaray, of course, when so many European teams were vying for him.
You say that once more for the people at the back. It's still weird.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'll say it once more for the people at the back. For the ladies and gentlemen, you lot just rattle your jewellery, lords and ladies, and the Queen, obviously. But anyway, yes, Victor Osimhen has gone to Galatasaray. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? But do you think that PSG can accommodate a Pep Guardiola, for example?
Well, I think there is a parallel to be drawn, because if you're asking, could it happen at PSG? It couldn't have happened in other PSG generations, and by other PSG generations, I mean as recently as last season, because there was a bit of superstar child minding involved.
A bit.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm going off the fact that Mbappé is like possibly the lowest maintenance of those star three that we were talking about, and yet he's going to court to try and settle a dispute in which he claims that PSG offer him 55 million euros, and he's the lowest maintenance one. So I think to get past that, the job is different from the job he inherited. It is different from the previous jobs that Unai Emery had, for example, that Thomas Tuchel had. It's a totally different, almost not quite a blank canvas, but heading in that sort of direction. And I think if you look at how much Pep Guardiola has enjoyed Manchester City and why he stayed there for so long, in fact, he stayed there for far longer than he would have anticipated or predicted. It's because they make his life simple. All he has to do is have these incredible resources and produce the sort of team being successful and playing the sort of football that he wants. Now, there is more of a suggestion that Luis Enrique is able to do that than ever before. So it's not just that PSG are convinced by Luis Enrique being an aspect of him heading towards a new contract. It's that he wants to accept that new contract. And it's not just seen as a 2-year, 3-year, how long can anyone put up with this madhouse sort of business. It's not like that anymore. There's a suggestion that it is a sustainable sporting project. And I think there's logic in this. Actually, if we go back to upstairs at PSG as well, if you look around the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, I think it's significant what's happened in Saudi Arabia in recent years in terms of recruitment for the Saudi Pro League, because Verratti going to play in Qatar is almost a bit of an anomaly, really, with superstars in the modern world, because really Qatar for a while has been moving towards elite youth player development. And I think you look at the investments that have been made outside. You look at the investment in Braga in Portugal, for example. Now, obviously, there's not heavy links between Braga and PSG yet, but we'll see how that goes. But I think the idea of producing and developing young players is of more interest to them and has been of more interest to them for a longer time than the wider world would want to acknowledge. Of course, you can only really action this plan once you've got Messi and Neymar, and to a lesser extent, Kylian Mbappé, off contract as well. Now that's happened, there's a far easier route to that.
Yeah, absolutely. But and that brings me back to the point earlier about Xavi Simons, because as much as he is Netherlands international and spent many years at Barcelona in their academy, he made his senior debut as a professional footballer with PSG, so technically also counts in part as a homegrown talent. And you look at some of the players as well that Luis Enrique is openly pushing, giving them minutes. Mbappé, for example, who I think set a new record earlier this season for being the youngest player to make a professional debut for PSG. That is completely different to the approach that was taken for the most part of the first 10 years of Qatari ownership in Paris. And it's also one that's in line with the investments that they've made away from the pitch, where you look at, the campus, which is going to be one of the best sort of sporting facilities in professional football by the time that it is finished in the next couple of years. So in many ways, when you look at the power that Luis Enrique has been entrusted with, I think he was arguably the strongest candidate for this possible position, because you look at some of the projects that he'd led in the years before he joined PSG, notably with the Spanish national team, where he oversaw, the bleeding in of all of this young talent that came to fruition this summer in Germany at the Euro. I think he is the logical guy to sort of continue this project, because there are very few managers who I think would be able to do what he's doing with a team that has the average age that PSG's does right now. I mean, we forget that they were the youngest team sort of in the latter stages of the Champions League last season as well. So for them to have gotten to the semi-finals with a relatively inexperienced team as well, obviously, Mbappe being an exception to that, given how early his career started. I think that also speaks in Luis Enrique's favour. And, PSG are onto a very good thing, very clearly. It's another question whether they see or continue to see, that they're onto that and act sort of accordingly.